And it's like you're allowed to like Nietzsche. It's okay. It doesn't turn you into a Nazi.
Right.
Nietzsche is not a Nazi. There were a lot of people who appreciated Nietzsche who never were right-wing or political or let alone Nazis. And just let yourself have like what Daniel Tuck calls dangerous thoughts.
All right, well, welcome to the Cutrone Zone again. With me today, as always, is the last Marxist genius and prognosticator, Chris Cutrone. I think you called this election for Trump. I mean, you hedged your bets a little, but you called it. You were on the stream with me last night as the results came in.
Yep.
How are you feeling this morning?
Well, of course, I went to bed. Went to sleep after watching Trump's victory speech. And I have been concerned. I think we mentioned it on the stream yesterday, and we've maybe talked about it on the podcast previously. I am concerned about the Democrats winning the House of Representatives, because then they could refuse to certify Trump. Now, of course, he also, as it turned out, won the popular vote, which I was not clear on that when I went to bed last night, that was the case. I wasn't maybe paying attention to that. I was just looking at the Electoral College. And so I think that insulates him from that kind of shenanigans. If he had lost the popular vote and they won the majority in Congress, which is still out now, like they haven't fully determined who's controlling the House of Representatives. The Republicans have some kind of a majority in the Senate, but the full extent of it has not been determined. But I do think that the Democrats, they kind of can't help themselves, and they have a couple of months to talk themselves into it.
Right.
But the popular vote, I mean, it's a three-part prognosis that I had about any drama after the election. One is that Trump wins the Electoral College. The other is that he loses the popular vote. And the third is that the Democrats control the House of Representatives. So one of those has failed to come true, and so therefore probably won't happen. But this won't be the end of it. I think Jon Stewart said the fight's not over.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
which could mean anything, of course.
On Twitter this morning, there's a new hashtag. And it's the hashtag Kamala Don't Concede.
She just did, though.
Yeah. She did? I thought she was going to do it at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, she's doing it at 4 o'clock as a speech, but she already phoned Trump.
Yeah, I know she phoned him. But
so once she does that, legally, it becomes more problematical.
Oh, is that true? Okay.
Of course. Yeah, she,
Well, I mean, Gore called to concede and then called right back. Remember that?
But he had to call back, right? In other words, it had to be like, yeah, I don't know. I thought I was talking to my mother-in-law, right? But no, all this stuff can be used in court.
Right. Of course. But if they're not going to certify, that really doesn't have anything to do with whether or not Kamala Harris concedes.
That's true too. She didn't ever have to concede.
I mean, she could concede or not, but the refusal.
They could refuse to certify, and then they could. I don't know what. I mean, she would still be the person. I don't think they'd throw it to the full House. I think that we talked about this. The most that they would have tried to do, because they gamed it out. They already said what Trump might do in an article in the Atlantic or the New York Times or something. And I thought, okay, actually they're telling us what they're planning to do.
Right.
Which is whittle down the Electoral College, like disqualify states such that the majority can be reversed without throwing it to the full House to, elect the president.
The other thing I've noticed is that on Twitter, there are people who are saying that the bomb threats from Russian actors that came in on Election Day, along with other forms of interference from the Republicans.
Bomb threats at voting sites? Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, I mean, so they could use that. They could say it wasn't a legitimate election because there were bomb scares. But I didn't hear about any actual voting stopping due to any of that.
I have not heard any story about it, but David Korn said that the Russians interfered, and I think he was talking about this. And then, but I didn't see any primary sources. He didn't link to anything. And then I've seen some tweets saying that there were bomb threats, Russian bomb threats, but I haven't found a story.
There was a Russian bomb plot that was discovered a few days ago where it was incendiary devices planted on planes in Germany, DHL.
Right.
And they don't know how official or how rogue that might have been.
Yeah. But
Right.
that's not what this is. That's
different.
Yeah. So I don't know, but there calls for a recount and even a revote. That's a tweet. I mean, that's not any call from the state, but
it's not going to come from the state. It's going to come from the party.
Right. And it's not, and that may be coming from some small part of the party. You know, they may be floating.
Well, if we remember to 2016, there were articles published after the election and before the certification asking for electors to not vote for Trump but vote their conscience and put in Hillary instead of Trump.
Right, but Hillary herself never called for that.
No, she did not. But she also didn't stop it. Right. So these were from mainstream newspapers that, of course, have connections to the Democratic Party, and it's not as if she didn't know that they were going to publish such articles.
Yeah. At the time, I supported that idea. By the way,
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
No, I mean, this is what we're dealing with. And, we're dealing with the fact that I think that wanting the Democrats to do this or that dies hard. Like, what I would just say, children, I don't want anything from the Democrats. Nothing.
Right.
I want maybe, what you want from any official, which is to do their job, reasonably competently and not corruptly and, in good faith. I want that from any elected official, anyone in a position of power. But I don't really want anything in particular from them besides that. Meaning,
right.
Now, so that's not a political criterion, right? That's just a pure, if people have power over me, I want them to act responsibly.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I am watching the people in my milieu and beyond it, definitely trying to correct the Democrats.
Of course. Of course.
This way.
No, the left thinks that they are policy advisors and political advisors and propagandists for the Democrats.
Right.
They want to be. They're armchair Democrats. They're Monday night quarterback Democrats.
Some of these people are journalists, of a kind.
Well, the journalists also have confused themselves for politicians.
Yeah. Yes, they have, and
we have to be careful ourselves.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
Journalistic responsibility and responsibility as intellectuals is different from responsibility as actual political actors.
Right. I'm going on Twitter telling all of them, just leave the Democrats. Leave the Democrats. I'm not. Does that?
Yeah, I don't even know what that means because they would just say, well, they're not members of the Democratic Party. Meaning, how many people are official Democratic Party members? Now, I do know some.
Yeah.
Right. Who are actual people who are delegates at the convention and things like that. But unless you're that, then you're not a Democrat. You're just a voter. You're just you're like a fan of a team. It's like the Cubbies. The fans of the Chicago Cubs over here who play about a half a mile away from me at Wrigley Field. And I'm sure that they think of themselves as part of the team, but they're not.
But when I say leave the Democrats, I mean precisely don't advise them. Don't think of the Democrats as your party. Don't think that they're going to help any kind of left project.
But Doug, if they're not our party, then who is? The Republicans?
Well, no.
Right.
We don't have a party.
Exactly. We don't have a party. It's called Join the Working Class.
Yeah.
Meaning these are parties of the ruling class. They're by, for, and of the ruling class. And it's like what we were talking about last night. There are struggles among the ruling class, and this is the way they adjudicate it. Then, it goes back to ancient Rome. How do you adjudicate struggles among the ruling class? Well, you enlist the plebeians to support your faction.
Mm-hmm.
And it is blood on the streets. Like you can do various things with your plebeian support base, right? Bread and circuses, like you can buy them off, you can get them to vote for you, you can have them do violence for you, you can have rioting. They had that in Rome, as a political tactic, right? And that's Trump's sin, is that he unleashed the plebes on his elite opponents. That's what you're allowed to do, right? In a democracy. Like, in other words, we're supposed to have made progress over ancient Rome. Whether or not we have is an open question.
Right. Well, but he didn't unleash the plebes. Well, I guess on January 6th.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about the thing that disqualifies him.
Right.
Remember this when they decertify him, if they can. It will be that.
Right. But they themselves unleashed the plebes in that summer.
They did and they didn't. They did.
In their own estimation, they did. They considered the Black Lives Matter protests their assets.
They appropriated it. They did. And the Democrats, I would say that the Democrats do have some kind of an ability to turn on and turn off protest movements. They do. So when movements don't suit them, they vanish. The anti-war movement vanished. The immigrant rights movement vanished. Right.
And the pro-Palestinian movement is now in the process of vanishing.
It is, but so here's the danger. So the danger is it's mediated, meaning it's not like orders from the top or something. So they have a middle-class base, the Democratic Party.
Right.
There's also middle-class civil society that shops around for parties to support them. So Trump famously in this election cycle got the support of Arabs and Muslims in Michigan. They endorsed him very prominently. They got up on stage. He kissed and hugged them. These dudes, with beards and whatever, and they're imams and they're community leaders and they're whatever. I'm sure there was a mixture of Christian and Muslim Arabs, and basically, these are middle class. These are like business owners or civil society leaders. Like religious leaders, and so sure they can switch parties. Of course they can, right? So it's mediated. And of course, those people can, those are the people, in fact, who run protest movements.
Right.
And that's why there is a living actual connection, however mediated, between the Palestinian solidarity protesters and literally Hamas.
Right.
It's
but
through those things.
Well, okay.
No, it really is.
Well, but here's what I want to say about that. When you're talking about those community leaders in the United States who had the capacity to bring out voters or not, that's one thing. But when you're talking about the organizations that put together these protests, they were that was all being orchestrated through nonprofits and NGOs. And
we pay attention to the left elements of it, but we have to remember, going back to the war on terror, and also not only in the United States but in a place like the UK where there was the Respect Coalition, the Respect Party, that it is a common front between like organized leftists and Muslim and Arab community, like just middle class civil community leader type people. And so that, it's a mixture. Right. And the way that that's mediated internationally, by the way, is via the PFLP. Right. So they're the ones who link up the kind of, normal conservative middle class, Arabs and Muslims in the emigre community and the left. Like the left, like the people that we pay attention to, like the, Party for Socialism and Liberation, like those, the workers' world, like those, the organizers of the march that turns out a large student component.
But who funds the PFLP?
Well, they have some millionaire, members. These groups do have like trust fund baby type members. They also have people who are successful in business who dedicate their money to the cause. Their party members, party leaders, party benefactors, patrons. but you meant the PSL or you meant the PFLP?
Well, the one, I guess I meant the
PSL.
PSL.
PSL, yeah, because PFLP, actually has a base in
But,
Gaza and
right.
West Bank, and they
I
also
meant PSL, yeah.
yeah, and they have also a middle class sponsorship in the exile diaspora, Palestinian diaspora. I mean, not to I guess it's going to sound like conspiracy theory or guilt by association or something, but the only reason to point this out is to think about the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of movements.
Right.
And so the connection to the capitalist political parties is vital because that's the only way they can have any influence. But it's not direct; it's mediated.
Right. No, I know, but nonetheless, when those political parties no longer have a use for these
Right.
civil
Then
society, they can turn them off. They don't have their own political project, and I do think that has some connection to the funding, but not a direct one exactly. But it basically, I feel as though, tell me if I'm wrong, but from what I've read, what it seems like is that you have these institutions that are going to be working on the Palestinian issue.
Yeah.
That are nonprofits or NGOs and the directive comes down from some central NGO or somewhere that, okay, now we're doing the protests, and whether it's a direct order or it's just kind of picked up by modeling your organization after a more prominent one, that gets taken up.
It's not like that exactly. I think that they get grants, they get money.
And I'm not even talking about the funding mechanism. I'm just talking about how these organizations make decisions to move from one project to another.
Oh, sure.
So the grants will come in, but the grant's not going to come in for protests.
No. Although it's understood that they are funding organizations whose main activity is advocacy, and
but the form of the advocacy will change, and the amount of attention and maybe money, and what the aims of those organizations change based on the needs of their clients, which is the Democratic Party and these other organizations. So it will come down the pike that, okay, now we're no longer doing advocacy by lobbying. We're going to organize people to go out in the street.
Oh yeah, sure. There's legal, there's litigation, there's lobbying, exactly. And so exactly, that's the way it works. I mean, what I'd say is that what we saw with the Palestinian solidarity protests was an attempt for Arab and Muslim Americans to have a greater prominence within the Democratic Party. And it was motivated by the urgency of the issue. It was like, oh, under these conditions, suddenly we realize how little of a voice we have. And so we want more of a voice. We saw that at the DNC.
Right.
We saw that they were denied a speaker on the main platform of the convention, but they were given a panel at one of their workshops, which is actually where a lot of the, training and the connection between the National Party and these NGOs, that's how it's facilitated. That's how it happens. And they consider that to be progress. Right. Like, the Democratic Party officially allowed a panel on Palestine, with speakers, all, pro-Palestinian speakers at their convention. And yes, it would have been nice if they had had a speaker on the main stage, but this is still progress. And it was Zogby. Do you know Zogby of Zogby, the company? He was one of the people on the panel. So these were not just your random, campus activists. These were people who were real players in the Democratic Party.
But could they have gotten that panel without the protests beforehand?
No.
Right.
No.
So, and the protests beforehand were aimed at changing the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And getting a different voting bloc in. And that voting bloc would have been organized by these different institutions.
And have a seat at the table of any kind of negotiation. And by the way, I mean, they do kind of have a seat at the table anyway. In other words, like the U.S. has been fostering some kind of a peace process on and off with Israel-Palestine going back a while. And so, of course, on the Palestinian side, are Palestinian American lawyers and political scientists, like Rashid Khalidi, who teaches, I think, at Columbia University, and whose work was read widely on the Solidarity movement. He is someone who has literally advised negotiators in this process.
Right.
He was there, like not just advised in the sense of have a phone call. No, he was like literally at the table.
Right. And the BDS movement came out of when I looked into when the BDS movement arrived in the UN, it was funded by like the Open Society and
George Soros,
and other other Democratic Party major donors
absolutely
were involved with that. So it's that is again.
Look, this is a liberal democracy. I have the neo-Stalinists on my mind. And so it's a liberal democracy in the sense of it's not a lockstep party bureaucracy that's dictating everything. Right? Of course, the Republicans will make it seem like that's what it is. And, in their own way, they'll pretend like, oh, well, the Democrats are this totalitarian. No, I mean, the thing is that it is up to the politicians to listen to people, to not listen to people, and it's up to these groups to try to get an audience, to go begging hat in hand, to go begging for someone to listen to them. I mean, I was just watching something with Mearsheimer, and Mearsheimer was complaining about the fact that no one in a policy position in the United States ever listens to him, but people around the world listen to him. But it has no effect because the actual policymakers of the United States, he has no hearing there. And I was like, oh, my poor John Mearsheimer, my poor professor. Sorry,
How would he go about getting a hearing?
Oh, he could be. That's the thing. He could very well have an audience. They just choose not to.
Right.
It's not like they're unaware of him. They're just like, yeah, John Mearsheimer, we know what his shtick is. We don't care.
But when we're talking
why would they listen to him? If things go disastrously wrong in the Ukraine war or something, then suddenly they might call John Mearsheimer in. But he's probably past his prime, so they probably wouldn't see much reason to listen to him. There are probably people in the blob already who have a kind of Mearsheimer position who would be invited in.
Okay, but what I'm asking is to get someone like Mearsheimer on a panel.
Oh, at the convention.
At the convention to be really listened to by the party, it would take this kind of organizing that we've been describing to do.
It would take that, or it would take some kind of internal dissension in the party or in the the bureaucratic apparatus. Because that's the other thing, is that the deep state, the bureaucracy, they also switch party allegiance, and they also look for hearings in the party. I mean, like Scott Ritter,
right?
Scott Ritter was an arms inspector, career, kind of diplomatic corps type person who's ended up just being someone whose only recourse is to shout on the street. Right? That can always happen to us, right? Like, in other words, you can be in the corridors of power, you can be in the palace intrigue, or you can be consigned to screaming on the street.
Right. But
so that means everyone screaming on the street imagines that one day they'll be in the palace intrigue in the corridors of power.
Of course.
Right.
But if you're one of these community leaders, then you can't really be reduced to screaming on the
Oh, no, they do. They happily do, because it's like, it shows your authenticity. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, do you remember the anti-austerity protests?
I guess if your voting block is too small and not necessary, if they've calculated that in this election your group, your votes don't mean anything or aren't consequential, then you can be pushed aside. Is that?
Well, it's like they have, obviously, there are states like Minnesota and Michigan that have sizable enough, because these things just add up. It's an aggregate, right? And so it's like there is an Arab American community.
Yeah.
And they exercise influence, power. They are a sizable voting bloc in one region and not another, in one congressional district and not another. And, so it all adds up, meaning like sometimes people who have a small piece of the pie end up being in a crucial position. in terms of the alliances that have to be thrown together in order to affect, like, electing someone or passing legislation, or, so it all adds up, and the Democratic Party is this ethnic constituency machine racket formation. In other words, this is what they're good at.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is what they have been practicing since the gangs of New York, since the 19th century. This is their particular métier. Their expertise is in cobbling together these minority groups and making a majority out of them.
Right. And the Republicans don't, or have not historically worked that same way.
They have and they haven't, meaning, of course, I feel like the identity politics people would just say, oh, well, the whites are an identity. They just are in the majority, and so they don't need to be considered as one. And so, but of course, whites are divided up. There are different religious congregations. There are obviously different, like, business interests. There are different classes. There are different geographical regions. There's all sorts of ways that you have to cobble it together. It's just not in that specific vein. Although, of course, they do, like the Democrats, manage their diverse audience. They say things to one audience and say something else to another audience. And they also have to manage the conflicts among these people. So I think that we talked about this, that, let's not forget the Reagan coalition, the neoliberals, the neoconservatives, and the Christian evangelicals all hated each other. They really hated each other.
Right.
And, but they had to unite to elect Ronald Reagan and keep some kind of Reaganite Republican Party going for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they had contempt for each other. And so they would rather have not needed the others.
Right.
Right. And then the party itself becomes the master of playing up and reconciling, negotiating, settling those disputes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In other words, like, it just very straightforwardly, neoliberals are pro-abortion and Christian evangelicals are anti-abortion.
Right.
Right. In other words, it's part of the neoliberal economic program that working class people have less children. So, of course, you put contraception and abortion in. I mean, I wrote about this in one of my Trump articles. I said, it's not accidental, as Marxists always like to say, that 1973 was the year of Roe versus Wade, because that's the year that it all goes south. It's like, you know what? Actually, we don't need so many babies, so let's do abortion.
Right.
In other words, obviously obviously people do think this way, but it happened more organically. It happened, at the level of, oh, maybe we need to pay workers less. Maybe that means that they can support fewer children. Maybe that means that they should have easier access to contraception, including abortion. Right? It unfolds over a period of time.
Right.
And so
and it also becomes real demands from the working class themselves. They want these things.
Oh, of course they do. That's right. So, of course they do. But you could say they always did, but more or less urgently.
Right.
And of course, socialists have to anticipate and think long term about, the rights and needs of the working class in capitalism, and the basis for organizing people in the struggle for socialism that come out of those rights and needs.
Right. And today there, one thing that I heard Spencer say last night, and which I've read about or seen evidence of, is that more women are saying that they don't really want to have a career. More young women are focused on possibly having families and children again. And that lines up with what I perceive to be a turn inwards. It's happening in every nation after the last 15 years or so of economic distress and the need for more self-sufficiency, not total, but
so let's track it. So Christopher Lasch had his day, and it was a while ago, right? It's late 70s, early 80s, and then he is rediscovered by the millennials. I was told to read Christopher Lasch by Adolf Reed.
I read Christopher Lasch on my own initiative in the 90s, but in
the 90s, right?
Yeah.
And so it was there. It's not like it was particularly obscure, but it wasn't as ready a point of reference the way it is now. Like, I feel like
Right.
now it's common for millennial leftists to have, Lash as a touchstone,
Right.
And it's kind of like, well, yeah, because Lash came out of the 70s crisis, and the Great Recession did bring back all the issues of the 70s crisis.
Mm-hmm.
After, for a little while, it didn't seem so, in other words, Lash was complaining about something that seemed to be disappearing. The family did make a comeback in the 80s and 90s. It did.
Mm-hmm. And there was even a baby boom again.
Yeah, and that's the millennials. The millennials are that baby boom, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who come out of the 80s and 90s prosperity and the restoration of the family. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't exist.
Right.
Right. And of course, it was too successful, meaning because it was a baby boom, there were too many workers, not enough jobs. And therefore, the millennials became socialists.
Right. Yeah.
Again, we have to, I think I always describe this as the 1,000-year stare, or the 100-yard stare of the, like, blasted, like, war veteran.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I am. I'm the blasted out war veteran with the 100-yard stare, but really it's a 1,000-year stare. Meaning, I'm thinking, what does 2024 look like from the perspective of 25-24?
Well, that's impossible to say, but maybe 21-24.
21-24. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to say, but in 25-24, people will be talking about the second election of Donald Trump.
Yeah, some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It will be, I mean, they've entered the history books.
Whereas if he hadn't been elected yesterday, he might have been a footnote, a forgotten.
Yeah, less remembered. I mean, we remember all the presidents, of course, because the United States is a consequential country.
Mm-hmm.
And, all the presidents are world historical. And the longest continuous republic. I mean, the reality is the United States, which will celebrate its 250th anniversary under Trump now, instead of under Harris, right? And in 2026, is the longest continuous republic in the world.
Yeah.
And soon in history.
And I was there. We were both there for the last.
Yeah, for the bicentenary. That's right. No, I mean, I can't really estimate properly how much of an impact that made on me, because I know that, there were a good couple of years, and there were these cartoons, like there was all this education around 1776 and the Constitution when we were very impressionable elementary school kids.
Yeah. I was 5,
I was 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was there. It was
but it didn't just happen then. It's like the next year and the year after. It was like this. Things didn't just disappear as quickly.
They did not. And let's remember also that, like, 2026, 1976 had right behind it a left.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In other words, when I look back at those cartoons, those little children educational cartoons from 1976, they're very new left. They're very 60s. They got a very 60s quality to them. And of course, the people who made them were young people, and, young adults, people coming into their own professionally who would have had a formative experience in the 1960s.
Right.
And I kind of tremble at the thought that the millennials are going to be the ones who are going to give us the aesthetic of the celebration of 2026.
Can I show something on the screen? I've gotten into this sharing clips, but I'm going to
go for it.
All right, here we go.
Now I see where you got this clip for.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is awesome. I have a feeling that 2026 is not going to be so imaginative.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll end it there. But yeah,
that's wonderful. It's groovy, and this is right after the Vietnam War and Watergate, and nonetheless, people could still muster an enthusiasm for the revolutionary heritage.
Yeah. It was a reclaiming of it.
Absolutely, and deservedly so, right? And so I think that that's what's really awful. I mean, American politics should be explicitly the struggle over the revolutionary heritage.
Right.
And instead, it's like, no, there was no revolution. Oh, no, it's not revolutionary. It's slavery. It's genocide. I mean, again, it's just such a fucking downer. I mean, shit, No, it's, it's the millennials really blew it. They really blew it. They were supposed to claim 1776 and they chose not to. And our generation is bad too. Obviously, we are the quincentenary 1992 anti-Columbus generation, which contributes a lot to this. Engels said, without Columbus, of course, you can't have the American nor the French revolutions.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I do recall being re-educated about Columbus in my 20s, right?
And that's what's going to happen to a lot of these kids now, right? And so, I mean, look, you were talking with Benjamin Studebaker on the Sublation show this week, and he's very down on the university. And socialists are going to be a very small, tiny, and embattled and besieged minority at the university at best. But really, we have to do everything outside the university. Meaning, the socialist movement has to find a working class base. These non-college educated people who brought Trump back to power.
Yeah. I've been listening to Scott Adams. This is how...
oh, man. No, I mean, he's a real grumpo, isn't he?
Yeah. But he says some things that are kind of wise, little wisdoms, not necessarily deep, but... And one thing
wisdoms or crotchets.
Yeah. Well, you choose. But what he said was, if you want to know what the truth is, talking to someone who's uneducated, it just gives you their first impression, is often going to be much more rewarding than talking to someone who's very, very educated, because the very, very educated are brainwashed.
Yep.
Much more. And the uneducated have received less brainwashing, and therefore they can respond more authentically and directly to what they actually see right in front of them. And that's Scott Adams. I mean, obviously not everything Scott Adams says or does is good. The more I've kind of watched his show as the election comes up, the more I realize he is a comedian.
He is.
He is not a political thinker.
No, and he sort of deploys a certain persona.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, no, he's he's a curious case. I mean, I just think it's very tragic, and yet it is true that the only real outlet for discontent to be expressed has been on the right.
That's right.
And, I was watching the New York Times, their podcast this morning with Michael Navarro and Ested Herndon and some others, Nate Cohn. And they were finally acknowledging, there's been a realignment. It's 8 or 9 years later. Yeah. Right. And what they said was that the problem is that the Democrats refused to see it and denied it. And therefore, as Michael Navarro put it, the Republican Party, Trump led the Republican Party on a journey through which it became the party of the working class across ethnic and geographical divisions in their discontent and demand for change. And it's I could have told you that in 2015. that this is where it's
Right.
going.
Yeah, but it wasn't as obvious then. I mean,
It was obvious to anyone who wanted to see it. That was my theme before getting on with you today. I wanted to revisit the problem of people not wanting to believe.
Well, okay, we should talk about that because, I mean, I do think that we were talking about the nuts and bolts of politics in a way that was useful for me to kind of be reminded or to be educated about that, because it does tell us, it at least starts to point the way towards what a campaign for a Socialist Party would have to do a bit, right?
And not
Where
to.
we're- and
Do
not
and
to.
not to. Yeah.
Like we would have to try to build up these civil society institutions and have a base
Independence.
of support in society that would be independent, but also we would not be seeking favor or support from any capitalist party in the state, which would be much more
Or these
difficult.
foundations. So, for the 60s generation, the big villains were like the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation. Those are the people who were seen as destroying the movement. Whereas now, the International Socialist Organization, when they folded and just became Haymarket Books and bought a building near me, like 2 blocks away, I can see it from my window right here. It was formerly the Chinese consulate.
Mm-hmm.
They got a grant to do that from the Lenin Foundation, which is a liberal foundation, however, quite conservative.
Right.
And basically it was as Haymarket Books, in other words, as a book publisher, and therefore, serving a kind of, humanities, literary, art, culture kind of function. They didn't get that money as the ISO, claiming to be like
Right.
revolutionary socialists or, as Cliffite, crazy post-Trotskyist Marxists. No. I mean, it's not like the Lenin Foundation didn't know that that's what they were, but check it out. The Lenin Foundation understood what they really were as opposed to what they thought they were.
And what were they really?
They're just a fringe tail of the Democratic Party. In other words, they had people in the Chicago Teachers Union, in the leadership. They were ultimately a reliable constituency of the Democratic Party, and therefore they could be given millions of dollars.
Okay, so let's go now to what you wanted to talk about just a moment ago, which is when people don't want to believe, how to deal with the fact that people don't want to believe, they don't want to be taught or learn. When Trump was running in 2015 and 16, and when he won, but even when he was running, I thought he represented a reactionary, populist force within the Republican Party, and I liked a lot of what he said, and his quips and things like about Bush
Aesthetically,
and
yeah.
Jeb Bush and things. But I thought, but I shouldn't be taken in by that populist dissent because I'm a Marxist and I need to see past the surface of things and blah blah blah. And so when he won, and it did seem that he won over more working class votes than the Republican Party had before, and more votes from Latinos, and I think even more votes from blacks.
From blacks, of course, yeah.
The move was, well, that's an improvement over Mitt Romney, but he's still a Republican. He didn't make such dramatic inroads there that it really changes the character.
Oh no, I mean Trump's not a. I mean the thing is, there are two ways of thinking about it. So there's like the drama around Trump, and then there's the question of, well, how dramatic a change is this? Well, it's not, right? And yet, so what it is it's an index of just how like petrified, ossified the parties had become, that just a slight change represented some kind of serious threat. I mean, Bernie, by the way, right? So Bernie was not a threat the way Trump was ever, but he was still treated as something of a threat. And all he wanted to do was bring the Democrats back to their pre-neoliberal selves. In other words, he just wanted to basically do what the Clintons and Obama claimed they wanted to do.
Right.
And yet, that was disruptive.
Right.
You
And
know,
the Marxist in me would have said, well, you can't do that because the New Deal's behind us and the
by the way, not just the Marxist, Clinton and Obama themselves, like the two Clintons and Obamas themselves would have, also said the exact same thing. They would have said, well, look at these changes in capitalism. We can't go back to that. And so this is just dangerous demagogy.
Right.
Do you remember the Washington Post had a horrible editorial about Bernie in 2016, where they said he's self-indulgent, narcissistic, right? That he's sort of in love with his own ideas, and he likes the sound of his own voice, and he's putting that above like political responsibility.
Right.
Right? Because the longer he ran in the primaries, the more he undermined Hillary, and Hillary was going to be the nominee anyway, and so forget about it. Right?
Right. And Trump, and also Trump.
Yeah.
Real scary.
Narcissist, right? Self-indulgent, likes the sound of his own voice.
But Bernie was helping Trump by.
Oh, sure. And of course that was true, meaning he was opening a can of worms. So when they say that, they're saying you're mobilizing people that we can't control, and just in terms of voting,
Mm-hmm.
But that's of course enough of a threat, because all these people need to do is win votes.
Right.
Right. At the end of the day, so so Trump in his victory speech last night, he said, historic realignment. And, and again, the New York Times now is, they're willing to say, yes, there's a realignment going on. We've been talking about it for several years, right? Mm-hmm. Already starting in the Trump era. Jacobin, DSA, they've called it the de-alignment. So it's not a realignment, it's a de-alignment, meaning that the Democratic Party has become de-aligned from the working class.
Right.
Right, and that has left the working class either unrepresented or represented by someone like Trump, right? So there is a cognizance of this, but the significance of it, I will also say that Trump in 2016 said the Republican Party is not the conservative party. There are other countries, and they do have conservative parties, like the UK has a conservative party, and we're not that, and we shouldn't try to be that. We should be the working class party. And, this was against the old Reaganites. It was against the Tea Party people. It was against Cruz, right? Like that was the occasion, because Cruz was his last serious opponent in the primaries in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, the Republicans have not been, are not, and should not be the capital C conservative party. That's not true to the American political system. Mm-hmm. And really, we should want to win as an America First party, and that means you have to be the working class party. And of course, that's not a positive vision so much as his sense that the working class was up for grabs. That the Democrats were no longer the working class party, because of course historically they were the working class party, but they no longer were. Right. And so he was basically saying we should be, and don't let this ideological conservatism get in the way.
So why would someone like Sohrab not end up walking away from Trump in this last and trying to glom on to Biden? He wasn't. He's not aligned with the Lincoln Project and the Charlie Sykes and the Joe Walshes. He is of this populist.
I think people are super impressionistic. It's what we were talking about on the stream about why I want Kamala to win. Like there's magical thinking, there's impressionism, there's just simple-mindedness, rhetoric. I think people confuse style and substance. They confuse rhetoric and actual analysis. And, I feel like I belong to a whole different universe. It's I think Ben Studebaker said to you that, we don't do irony. I'm like, what are you talking about? How can you not do irony? Irony is built into language. It's built into thinking and feeling,
what he means is we select how we want to interpret something based on who we think is speaking or something like that.
But I think he was also saying we don't have the patience for it, but also we're not well educated in it. meaning we don't know how to do that thing that you guys do. You old people, you do this thing, irony, and we don't really have the hang of that. And that's
Yeah, well,
true.
irony's dangerous. Irony can always go wrong.
But it's also necessary. I mean, what did you publish, Ben Burgess, Killing Comedy?
Canceling comedians while the world burns.
Yeah,
yes.
Right. And it's like, it's irony and humor, right? And so we have entered into a world where, and I don't think it's Trump's fault. I mean, look, so the election is basically polarized. It's the humorous versus the humorless.
Yeah.
It really is.
If that's how it's going to be, I mean, I'm going to vote for the
We're
humorous.
going to be with the humorous. Of course, we can't be with the humorless. I mean,
Right.
For Christ's sake, to be humorless, why would you want to even be alive?
I know. Well, I agree completely. So it's kind of complicated though, because on the one hand, humor is rhetoric. Or,
but it's also substance. It
has substance to it.
It's the interplay.
Right. Yes, that's right. Something isn't funny if it's strictly rhetorical. It has to have some truth to it.
We have to care about it. In other words, these people would have us only laugh at things that we don't care about, but then you wouldn't laugh.
Right.
Right? Like the fact that there's a trash crisis in Puerto Rico means that, the Pacific floating island of plastic garbage, and then suddenly transposing it in an unexpected way. Oh, it's Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
That's funny for anyone who cares about Puerto Rico. In other words,
the problem is no one gave a fuck about Puerto Rico, so no one knew that Puerto Rico had a garbage problem.
Right.
And so the joke fell flat because the context for it was missing.
Right.
You had to like look Wikipedia, I
mean, he himself knew it.
Yeah, because he goes there. He was he cared about it.
Yeah, he cared about it, right? And maybe we could say, I don't know, like Trump's audience at Madison Square Garden, maybe they're more likely to vacation in Puerto Rico rather than in France or whatever.
Well, it didn't get a huge laugh.
It did not. It did not. But
so I don't think the context was there even from.
He was
even
doing
in the
things
audience.
for that kind of like uncomfortable feeling, like it's the roast humor.
Yeah.
Right. He was doing.
Which I'm not a big fan of. I'm not a big fan of.
No, it's not good. It's not. I mean, I'm not a big fan of it. I mean, I guess it's its own thing. There are actually a lot of comedians like this, and I don't quite get it. I'm much more. I don't know. Maybe I'm more like visceral humor or something. Like I feel like the kind of like too smart, maybe too ironic, or something, but also too like it just takes on different kinds of energy, like a kind of a mean energy, And so I prefer like more slapstick humor, more silly humor, but you can still see that that's what's going on. Whereas I feel like, okay, and then if you just like slice it out and then you put it out there and you desperately try to turn off, Latino voters, as if all Latinos are the same, they're not.
Yeah, as if Latinos are sitting around with lives that are so comfortable that that they run their lives like it's a cocktail party and they vote for people based on who they would invite to that cocktail party, right? Oh, he's going to cause people to feel uncomfortable at this cocktail party. We're not going to invite him.
Depends on which cocktail parties we're talking about, meaning he might be the life of the party, or it depends. Like, again, for the humorless people, I don't even know if they don't even have cocktail parties. They just have faculty meetings.
They have cocktail parties. No, they do have cocktail parties, and they drug themselves up when they go to them.
Oh, shit. Because they have
so
much social anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really unfortunate. No, so, look, we are in a strange world, so what we're talking about in terms of people not wanting to believe. Because they're afraid to think. And they want to impose that fear on everyone. Like I wrote in my article, I wasn't sure whether I was overstating it, where I was just like, look, am I bored or am I numb with fear? Meaning, is it a fear that I'm not even aware that I'm afraid? But of course I am. And where did this come from? And it's kind of like, well, they are, right? And so they are, making us all share their misery. But what are they afraid of? They're afraid of the unknown. And I think I mentioned that in my Why Not Trump article series early on, where it's just like, okay, you're saying that you have no tolerance for the new and the different, the slightly unknown. You have no spirit of trying something different.
Right.
And I mean, so these are highly ossified political parties.
Mm-hmm. Well, not anymore. The Republican Party is not so ossified.
No, it's not. It's not. And whether it can hold it together, it's pretty ramshackle, actually.
It is. Yeah.
That's what we saw in Milwaukee,
Yeah.
Barely keeping it together.
I found it very relatable running a ramshackle media company. I thought, oh yeah, these are my people,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And so they're trying out something new. They don't know what works. They're not. I mean, look, obviously there were the grim, humorless Republicans. You met them at the Principles First thing.
Yeah.
Could they laugh at themselves or laugh at Trump? Not at all.
No.
The Trumpites are constantly laughing at themselves.
Yeah, Charlie Sykes called Trump a reptilian.
I know, and it's like, wait, man, that's you. Meaning right. You've reduced yourself to that.
Yeah.
Meaning, I'm not saying that he is reptilian, but it's like he's in this mindset. He's like locked in this place where that's the part of himself that he's in touch with.
So how do we cut through that? How do we get? I mean, especially for people on the left, because there are people who started on the left I think out of an impulse, which I completely have sympathy for. That both wanting to be more humane, wanting to be more human, wanting to develop more freedoms and more opportunities for themselves and everybody else. I think that's what they.
It's a little bit of a problem. I mean, I was there for the whole ride with the millennials. And starting with the anti-war movement, I thought, okay, this is a little hysteric. This is a little humorless. This is a little bit unthinking. It was always there. There was a problem, with the Iraq body count. Do you remember that thing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, okay, yes, it's horrific, but, we have to make use of the fact that we are not literally crawling out from under rubble being bombed, right? Like, we're here, And so there is an opportunity, and there are Iraqi leftists amongst us in the United States and Europe, and, we can take a beat and we can think about how to deal with this. We don't have to be like, what were people saying about Palestinian solidarity? They could not sleep. I had students who could not make art knowing that a genocide was taking place. And I said to them, people have made art throughout all of history while wars and genocides and all sorts of bad things were happening. People made art through all that. There's absolutely no reason for you to just be frozen, like literally frozen in fear.
Yeah, I mean, Picasso.
Yeah.
Guernica, one of the great works of art, I think.
But the idea was that if you dare indulge in something like art making, this is a disrespect to the victims.
Right.
That's awful. I mean, I don't know where this mentality comes from. In other words, I have not faced such depressed people in my life.
Right.
It's like they have no ability to be anything but super literal, grim, again, humorless, and there's no like anything that I would associate with like actual defiance. In other words, I'm going to live despite this.
Right.
Not I'm just going to become the personification of like death. I mean, it's the fucking Hamas thing.
Yeah. I want to run another clip Here, I show this all the time, but here it is.
Greatness doesn't discriminate. It doesn't see where you're from, what you look like, or who you know. Greatness is for those who work for it, for those who keep moving forward. Greatness is for anyone willing to fight for it.
Schmaltzy.
It's schmaltzy, I know, but the more I watch it, the more the old sentimental me is like actually sees past that and is actually moved by it. Because if you can't be moved by the fact that this old man got shot, stood up and said, "Fight, fight, fight," and meant it, and not just for himself, you know.
No, I mean, it's true. I mean, so it's the citizen Trump paradox. I mean, so what are we trying to do in terms of reaching people for the struggle for socialism? So first of all, we do have two different audiences entirely. And here on Sublation, we basically have one audience, and that audience is leftist intelligentsia.
Yeah.
The socialist intelligentsia, wannabe Marxist, some kind of disaffected people whose reality is really a mental reality, and that's real. I'm not trying to just derogate that by any means. What I'm saying though is it's very tricky, because it's, as Adolf Fried taught me a long time ago, the left is reduced to a taste community. I
got this light coming in from the window. I feel like I look like a ghost or something in this.
Yeah, you look like you might be like broadcasting from a deep bunker.
Yeah, and I
but in fact, it's sunlight.
It's sunlight.
That's great. Now that I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it makes it quite different. But then it's sunlight, but it's just like peeking through the shades, like you have your shades on.
I have, right.
Right, against surveillance by the deep state. And so the light is like struggling to come through. Give one little kiss to Doug Lane, who's otherwise like Mel Gibson in that movie.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, so we have to reach beyond the intelligentsia, but Sublation we should try to, but the campaign certainly will, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But Sublation is for people who read, who have time to listen to podcasts. And I know that this is not like it's a class sociological thing. It's what I always like to say is, like, workers can be intellectuals too. And then they're subject to the same problems. So as I was mentioning, like, taste community, right? Is this a taste community? And I think that I wrote about it in the preface to The Death of the Millennial Left. Like, I had to acquire a taste for Trump. In other words, Trump was not immediately to my taste. He kind of grew on me, but I also kind of forced myself to like him, because the only alternative was to hate him. In other words, there was no being neutral. It was like, you're either going to love this guy or you're going to hate this guy. And I can't afford to hate this guy, because then I might not see things that I need to see because students are asking me. Right.
And I have come to admire him as a performer.
Yeah.
As a showman, that I recognize that. And to try to read him as someone who's working in the arts in a way, or almost, So it's not great art.
No, but there's a certain talent, there's a certain skill. There is.
Yeah.
There's a craft to it, and it is sui generis, meaning, it's not like there's a Trumpist style. The people who try to imitate him, it doesn't really work.
Right, no.
And I mean, he is also surrounded by some grim, humorless people as well. The right, like Stephen Miller or whatever. People who only speak in like one tone of voice, like all the time, and it's like, fuck, man, just take a fucking chill pill. But and then of course it doesn't help that he's the anti-immigration guy. Ugh. Right.
No.
It also doesn't help that a platypus had a reading group participants at the University of Chicago who went to work for him.
Oh,
one of the people we lost to the right. But anyway, I mean, whatever. But so, is socialist movement predicated that we're trying to get underway predicated on having a taste for Trump. No,
No, it isn't.
it absolutely is not, right? And so all that, we're asking, and it's a big ask, is have some sobriety and the requisite critical, rational distance, and to really just be aware of that the proximal enemy, the immediate obstacle, is the Democratic Party and its NGOs, including the labor movement, organized labor as it exists. And that, insofar as the culture wars refers to something real, it does, unfortunately, then we are trying to reach people who are on both sides of that cultural division.
Mm-hmm.
But also we're trying to reach people who are not as deeply wedded. It's what I talked about at the G-Man Tavern event with David Shields and Benjamin Studebaker that you moderated, where I'm like, look, we are intellectuals. Our currency is words and images. We put a great deal of stock in these things that your average person who's a mere passing consumer of them does not, right? So we don't want to be like fanboy leftists. We don't want to be fanboy socialists. We don't want to be like, political junkies. That's not, it's not like, okay, we're going from being Democrat political junkies to being Republican political junkies or something. No, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's really without style, we might say. Meaning, we don't want to like do anything that would exclude people at the level of cultural affinity. We don't want to make that a kind of point of entry or kind of a gatekeeping.
I think that's really hard to avoid.
Very.
Because if you write a short story, you're not going to be writing a short story that everyone is going to admire or want to read, even. Mm-hmm. Just in order for it to be distinct.
That's true. But we know that art and literature, for example, has like a selective audience, or a broad audience, meaning there are different ways of writing that where, you play with style no matter what you do. Mm-hmm. That's just in the nature of things. But, are you playing to more of a connoisseur audience, right? Or not? Mm-hmm. And I feel like, again, I've struggled with this, by the way, in my writing. So the writing that's collected in our two books that Sublation has published, I've really, in a way that, I have a third book coming out that will be on the art writings. But with these writings, as opposed to the art writings, I had to really, like, hold myself back from being too stylistic, from being too poetic in any particular way. I had to be very pedestrian about it. And, I despair of the fact that people don't have the ability to read that either. But I do think that, like, when we were talking about, like, journalism as an outlet, I think that it would also be something that we're not looking for, like, a schizophrenic avant-garde writing style.
No.
It's not like a Nick Land, essay or something. And I mean, look, fine, like a lot of the left are people like that. That's cool. You just have to understand that's not the basis of a political movement.
To be slightly self-indulgent, do you think the Critical Cuts videos are too avant-garde or in that direction? Or
I actually don't think so. In other words, this is where, like, we are the postmodernist generation. So what does that mean? It means that, do you remember they used to call it like the new romantics and the post-romantics, and there's like punk and post-punk, like the moment that really gave our generation its style. It was basically, and filmmakers also did this, it was the permeation of the popular culture by previously more avant-garde styles.
Right.
And that's now become something that people just consume. In other words, it's not marked as such. And I do think that, you borrow from, like,
Curtis.
techniques Yeah, you borrow, but and then he borrows, right? But so it's like for the history of cinema that would have been much more, like recherche, like people
Mhm.
wouldn't encounter it. It's permeated the culture, and so it actually does not work against the popular style. And I'm thinking of the film, because I do
Mhm.
want and hope that the film will be edited in a similar style, and I think that it is accessible to people. I do. Meaning,
Mhm.
I think that people are able to consume that. That doesn't exclude an audience a priori, not at all.
Good.
And so, yeah, but it's one of these things where you have to take the bad with the good. The good is these styles are not off-putting. The bad is that they've lost their edge. But that's fine.
Right. Right.
That's fine because like what we're doing is again not trying to come up with a new style. In other words, it's not the situationists.
Right.
Right? Because the situationists were like, we need a whole different style in order to not be part of this bourgeois ideology. And it's
Right.
like, okay, no, actually, you didn't need to do that. You need to be better with your political theory. But anyway,
Right. Right.
right?
Mhm.
And so that's what always annoyed me about this, about the situationists. I almost said the surrealists,
And
right?
that, well,
They were an
same.
outgrowth. They were an
Mhm.
outgrowth, right? And it's kind of like, I'm very sympathetic as an artist. I'm sympathetic with that impulse, but I also know there's a difference between art and politics.
Right. Yeah.
So when you're trying to build a movement that's as inclusive as possible for people who are not culturally initiated, and you're trying to actually also include intellectuals who are not self-selected for cultural affinity, that
Mhm.
are not a taste community.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I've been on the left long enough to know like all the various varieties of leftism. They each had their
Mhm.
own style, and you often wondered whether people ended up in groups just out of like a kind of aesthetic taste.
Mhm.
And I just thought, wow, that really sucks because that's not like a legitimate political difference.
Can you tell me like what the style of the ISO was?
I mean, they were a little normy, but they were a little like hippie too, I mean, again, like the ISO had a very like Gen X contingent to it.
Mhm.
And so it does have this quality. And, it was also pretty Philistine. It's pretty Philistine. I'm just thinking, okay, so like the Spartacists, like my group,
Mhm.
they had some very weird, like simultaneously very 1930s and very 1960s style that they never really let go of.
Mhm.
And, it's kind of this strange militant style that was meant to mark them as out of sync with their own time.
Mhm.
And there are other groups like that too. There was an offshoot of the Spartacists called Spark, and they kind of married that to a kind of a workerist kind of style. And but like RCP, Bob Avakian, like the Maoists had a different kind of style. They had more of a popular 70s style that then they just kept going after that time
Right.
had passed, right? There were some groups that tried to adopt a more kind of 80s style,
Mhm.
but
There's
it
the ACP. They have their own style now.
they do, and
It's
it's like kind of a 30s
yeah.
retro, right?
Mhm.
And prior to that, I think Caleb Maupin's organization, we had a speaker from that group, the CPI, Center for
Mhm.
Political Innovation, and he looked like he was literally a film extra from a movie set in the 1920s.
Yeah. Okay.
He could be he was an extra from the set of Mate One. Do you know that film?
No, I don't know that one.
That's a great film, by the way. So, to our audience, children, watch that film. It's
Mhm.
about a former Communist Party guy who ends up being a labor organizer in like Appalachia, and it's coal miners. And it's basically like white Appalachians, Italians, and blacks, and
Mhm.
having to organize them against like really brutal repression by the mine owners. And, it's just a great film. I think it's made in the 70s. It's a great, great film. I guess now it's become an obscure film, but it's a great film, and it's quite an artistic film,
Mhm.
but also a very emotionally powerful film and totally accessible, popular film.
Mhm.
You know, And so I think that, again, there were times historically when the left was trying to reach a mass audience in a way that, it's not to say that people don't want that, but they don't know how to do that. Because I think joining the left means, entering into some kind of cultural estrangement with your own background, like rejecting your parents or whatever. And, I guess that started in the 60s, maybe to a certain degree it was there in the 30s, but I kind of feel like, we've gotten really stuck in a rut. And
my kids are on the left, and it is not about rejecting their parents.
Right.
For them. I went into the left somewhat as a rejection of my parents.
Yes.
My kids
It's not.
did not. I wonder about, I don't know what that means when you weren't a red diaper baby either.
No.
Right?
No, not at all. I mean, my family is very Philistine and very conservative politically, and really uninterested in getting too deep in the weeds of politics, in a healthy kind of way, in a healthy kind of impulse. That's a little different. I mean, so I think that, but again, like, how do we wean the intellectuals from this? From the sort of in-group, out-group, the kind of little affinity group club kind of mentality, and the big fish in the small pond mentality. In other words, are people going to be willing to, put their ego aside and say, Chris Cutrone is the way? Especially after bad-mouthing me for like 10 years,
Well, I mean, maybe that's not the right way to put it, Chris. But
I know.
but
entre nous, between you and me, it's going to be some of that.
Yeah.
Well,
there already is. There already are people who are saying things like, I'm voting for Chris Cutrone and Doug Lane for president and vice president this year.
In
and I'm
2028.
Like, why the fuck am I VP? But okay. On this question of style, forgive me for this, but it seemed to me that, like, my temptation, like, for instance, when we're going to start a Substack. I mean, first of all, Substack just has its own style built into it. You don't have to do anything to it. But if we did want to illustrate essays or articles, then there'd be a question of style, and one or even with the YouTube channel or the Sublation magazine that's already there, there's a question of style. And if we try to introduce, I'm tempted to try to introduce some Americana into it. But I think that might be a little too on the nose. On the other hand, it might actually be a way to exclude.
It really depends. I mean, I'm just thinking, there is a style to Sublation magazine already. There's a style to Sublation books. I don't think it's been exclusionary or off-putting, or, it's been aggressive in a particular way, but actually not in a way that's problematic to any extent. And so I don't think that it's manifesting there. I think it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of rhetoric, and, also just in terms of my own writing, who have I been writing for? I've been writing for people who have, I thought, some ability to think, and it's always a tricky proposition, when you don't know your audience and you're trying to create an audience, something that we've been talking about regarding Sublation throughout it, from its inception onward, that the task is not only to reach an audience, but to create one, right? And to create one that is not a priori exclusive or too narrow, right? And obviously the political ambition of the Campaign for a Socialist Party is different from a kind of more cultural or marketing even ambition of a publication company, publishing company, a media company. It's a little bit different. So ostensibly one wants as wide a market as possible, and yet one knows that it's not for everyone,
Right. Well, right. I want the Sublation project to be, first and foremost, I want it to challenge our preconceptions of what the left is, and to force us to engage in the actual world.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that so many people on the left, this is a kind of trivial example and easily explained, but nonetheless, the fact that so many people on the left were predicting Kamala Harris to have a landslide victory and putting up these maps where she...
Oh boy, that's just wishful thinking, right?
Yeah, but it demonstrated...
Not sure why they even wanted that.
Well, I say left, but I'm talking about some
really
of these
talking
big...
about the Democrats, yeah.
Like the Young Turks, someone like Kyle, someone from who's kind of adjacent to Breaking Points.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, but they were. I'm talking about the more central actors in the Bernie Sanders movement. People
the
who
Bernie
were
Crats, the Bernie Crats, right?
Yeah.
The people who would have been maybe Our Revolution instead of DSA.
Well, I think they would have been DSA too. I mean,
yes, it's some crossover there, right?
Yeah.
But right. So now, because it might have served their interests if they wanted to be a pressure like faction in the Democratic Party to have eked out a narrow victory for Kamala in which she would have felt chastened, meaning like, okay, you really need us. See how narrow your victory was, right?
Yeah, but when you make a prediction like that,
right?
If you want to say we don't, if you want to get the vote out for Kamala, then you say, it looks like she could lose. Everyone needs to go out and vote for her.
I'm afraid that the people who are more open to welcoming the Trump victory just see it as a punishment on the Democrats.
Yeah.
And I think my own writing about Trump over the years has been misconstrued as part of this kind of embittered Democrat kind of mentality of, well, because they screwed over Bernie, fuck them, and they need to learn a lesson. And it's like, yeah, no, that's not really the point, because now there are others who have been, I think, for instance, my old mentor, Adolf Fried, I think that his concern about Trump. So he's lied to people, like, are you going to be in a concentration camp? So what's the real concern?
He didn't think that when he said that. You don't think he believed that?
No, that was a lie. Of course. Absolutely. He knew he was talking to young people and he could scare them. And yeah, no. Unless, he really is senescent in his old age and just kind of anti-Trump hysteric.
I don't know. I think there's a middle ground. I think people sometimes say things to scare people that there's a way that they believe it.
You mean they half believe it? Yeah, but that's even a worse lie.
Like, well, I interviewed a guy who was a ufologist.
Uh-huh.
And he would tell these stories about the abductees that he would hypnotize and try to recover memories from. And when you looked into, there was an investigative reporter wrote an essay about him. And he said, when you investigate the way in which he actually behaved towards these people, like when a woman came to him and said she had been kidnapped by men in black and taken out to the beach and held there for a week against her will and interrogated about her experiences with UFOs. And she reported this to him. He did not go to the police.
Oh, he didn't go to the police, right?
He didn't act as though he was afraid it could happen again. He didn't. There wasn't. But he acted as though he believed her. But he didn't act in the ways that you would actually act if you really believed it. You know what I'm saying?
What if you are a deep ufologist and what if your considered judgment based on experience is that the police don't take these things seriously and that the police might actually interfere with your ability to investigate it?
Okay, then you should have some way to investigate it, which he did not have.
He didn't do? Oh, you mean it's just hypnosis?
It was just hypnosis and writing. It was not, didn't have like a group of people who he worked with to go to track it down that might have been armed.
So you're saying that he pretended to believe and didn't really believe?
He believed in a religious way.
Right.
He believed in it. He believed as a matter of faith, but not as a matter of life. is what I would say. And so perhaps Adolf Reed believed that they would be put in concentration camps in a religious way. It was like it was.
Oh, you mean that they should act as if they might end up in concentration camps because that's the right thing to do.
Right. And also right. And also just like
you should act as if you fear for your eternal damnation of your soul, whether or not that's really going to happen.
But in a religious ritual, it's not a matter of your day-to-day action. It's a matter of the incantation.
Oh,
right. You know what I mean?
Not an incantation. I don't think that it was that. I think it was very deliberate because it was the Platypus Kids. And so he was trying to say something. He was trying to say, oh, Chris Cutrone is wrong, and, you're going to end up in a concentration camp because you're listening to Chris Cutrone. And, I mean, maybe it was a complex kind of proposition in terms of the nature of the lie, but basically he thought I was an ultra-leftist who was politically bad and who was demobilizing young people, and the degree to which I had an influence, it was bad because people needed to vote for the corrupt warmonger imperialist. Like the title of his article, white people should vote for Hillary despite the fact that Bernie had been screwed over. He's like, vote for the corrupt warmonger imperialist, it's important.
Right.
And and so that's not a lie, right? In other words, that's very straightforward. But I feel like when you get upset with kids and you say, oh, well, you're going to end up in a concentration camp, I feel like it's a little bit different. I don't think that it was I mean, look, the reason that I say all of this is that the real fear is the real fear of Trump is not that he's going to set up a concentration camp. The real fear is that he's going to make the Democrats more conservative as they adapt to him. That's the actual fear.
Yeah, and which he has already done.
Of course. And Nixon did it and Reagan did it, right? So in other words, but he knows that he can't convince kids if you just put it like that. Right? Like, in other words, if you really want to mobilize kids and tell their friends and tell their friends and so on to make sure you go out and vote for Hillary, right? You're not going to say, oh, the real threat of Trump is not that he's a fascist, but that he's going to make the Democrats more conservative.
Yeah, but okay, I'm going to bracket.
That's why I say it's a lie. It's a fucking lie.
No, it is a lie. And of course, it's so stupid politically, even because even if you want to convince these kids, do you want them to be convinced one time and then just go away? Is that your goal? Is it?
Yes.
You don't want them to.
It's a cynical lie, meaning he knows that these kids are going to grow up to be conservative Democrats anyway. So there's just this one moment where you can push the Democrats to the left, but you have to trade on the naivete of kids and exploit that. Yeah.
But it's such a losing strategy.
I mean, hello. In other words, if it worked, but I don't even know what working would mean.
Okay, right, because so what he's missing is what he's forgetting is his own writing.
Yeah.
Right? Because
he gave up. I mean, look, there's his writing and there's his political self. And basically, like I always say, in 1980, he decided, you know what? Yes, I'm a Frankfurt School Council communist Marxist, extremely intelligent, sophisticated political scientist, intellectual, but none of that matters. We have to stop this Reaganism. He made a decision. I mean, I talked to him about it.
Right. Look, I don't think I'm on the level of Adolf Reed, at least in the way that he is, but I made a similar
remarkable
decision.
About him. It's a common thing. In other words, my disappointment is that he did what so many people do.
Yeah, but I made a similar decision when I found out about the Twitter files. I said to myself, look, I've been talking about Marx as best as I understand it, and I've been talking about theory and trying to.
But none of that matters if we get banned from social media.
None of that matters if we don't have the freedom of speech, not just social media, but if the First Amendment is really eclipsed or erased. Then
I mean, the scary thing is, Doug, I feel like we have to be prepared to be able to do things even if we are excluded from the internet.
Yeah. Well,
I
but
mean,
it's
look,
not
the
just.
right,
But
the right is prepared. They have Telegram and whatever, and even like WhatsApp and whatever,
Sure.
there is this peer-to-peer encrypted stuff. And, like they see the danger. In other words, that if you rely on simple public access social media, your reach is going to be limited. You're going to be censored. You might end up being banned. You might do something that gets you a lifetime ban on any of these major platforms.
Right, and it doesn't. You don't even have to do something really. They can just invent a reason. But
Oh yeah. That's the thing. In other words, you have to be concerned about that. I mean, we were talking about this on Platypus because I have a blog, The Last Marxist, and it's a subdomain of the Platypus website, and it was hacked. And because it's vulnerable to hacking, and we don't have the staff necessary to really prevent hacking. And so one of the Platypus kids was like, "Well, why don't you do a Substack?" And I was like, because I don't want Substack to decide that an article is violating their policy, and then it will disappear.
Right. But of course, who owns the Platypus website really?
We do. Of course we do.
Well, you have it registered as a domain.
Yeah.
With some company.
Oh, sure, but it's some company. It's like I'm sure that they are the kind of company. It's like GoDaddy or something. I'm sure that some like DNS registration. In other words, they have to register all sorts of like porn sites and all sorts of weird like stuff. And I'm sure companies based in Panama or whatever.
But they got rid of Parler, okay, on that level.
But it wasn't an app. It's never been an app. In other words, it can never be excluded from an app store. It's just a web address. That's
but it wasn't just the exclusion from the App Store. It was also taking away their ability to be online at all because the Amazon kicked them off their servers as well, I believe. So they weren't.
Yeah, we're not on Amazon servers. I'm sure we're on some Romanian
But you are on Amazon servers or ones like them because Amazon owns so many servers. You don't have to be. So these other companies are going to be on one of those big company servers. So the point is that when you're online,
thank God for Elon Musk, we need to be on the Starlink servers.
I guess, or have them it be on a bunch of different servers or something.
Right.
But my other point would just be with the Restrict Act coming through, and this stuff about Twitter and social media. It was not simply a matter of being banned as an individual social media user. It was a matter of if you started a company that had its own, domain name and also had a brick and mortar printing operation and shop, you could be put out of business by the state for what you print.
That's true. That is true. And that's always been the case. What I don't like is the instantaneity and the unappealability. In other words, like the state closing a physical business, there's at least some legal recourse. Whereas a social media company deleting your content by algorithm, there's no recourse.
Right. But the two together, the Restrict Act, and that to me went beyond simply thinking of it in terms of the internet. It was an extension of power to overturn and work around the.
It's real power. It is real power, and it is no. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying social media doesn't matter. What I'm saying is social media makes us vulnerable.
Yes, but I'm just saying the vulnerability is also there, and
it's there no matter what. No. Yeah. This is not for the faint of heart. This is, we're leaving civilian life.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say. I know like Leninism, military discipline, whatever. It's not quite like that exactly, but it kind of gets there pretty quickly. And, I was on a panel last week with a American Communist Party guy, and he's like, I realize I'm willing to die for this movement. I'm willing to die for my party. And, me and the other speaker, Jorge Mujica, who's a, longtime activist, he's like been tortured. He's like a Mexican communist who was like tortured, imprisoned and tortured. And he was just like, yeah, don't do that. In other words, like that sentiment is all well and good, but, we're not asking you to throw your life away. That's not the proposition, but it is taking your life in your hands. And it is, look, it is leaving civilian life. It is. Like, in other words, you're entering the realm of power, and power doesn't play.
Right. Well, listen, we've been talking an hour and a half. I want to take a little break, get some more coffee, and we'll do another hour maybe. And because I feel like there's still lots to talk about. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.